future technologies to create experiences for consumers. The reason we create experiences is very simple. Consumers' experiences are much more engaging than exposure. So I'll start at the beginning. Basically, we have the merging of two things at the moment. Something called experiential marketing, which has actually been around for a really long time, basically since the Wild West. I don't know if you've seen any old westerns with old wagons and people trying to sell lotions and medicines. So this is one of the most old forms of marketing, but it's become very outdated, more or less shoving products in your face. At the same time, we have digital. Digital is constantly changing, constantly emerging, and there's always new tools for us to use. So we're going to have an opportunity to look at some of these tools up close and personal at the end of this presentation. And Nick's brought some very interesting stuff with him as well. And we've bought some Oculus glasses as well, which has recently been bought from Facebook, and we'll talk about it a bit further down. So at its core, what we want to do is allow consumers to be part of an experience, opposed to just being exposed to it. The marriage of these two, digital and experiential, has produced a new form or a new category of marketing called experiential by most marketeers, but this has been called buzz marketing, engagement marketing. There's a whole bunch of words out there, and I think experiential is actually the most appropriate. So, why create an experience? Basically because, as I said earlier, experience has much more impact than exposure. What we want to do is, over time, allow brands to create connections with consumers. And the best way to do this is to immerse consumers into an experience. The reason for this is because experiences create memories. And in order to have a consumer advocate for our brand, the best way is to implant these memories into his mind and have him recall positively our brand further down in the future. In a recent US survey, 80% said they prefer brands that do more to interact as opposed to brands that just advertise to them. So interactivity is a basic, fundamental component of engaging with consumers for the relationship age. So as I said, we are moving out of the information age into the relationship age. We all create relationships online with other people. And that's exactly the point. We actually talk to other people. We don't talk to brands. So what brands need to do is engage with us in two-way conversation as if we are actually talking to a person. One of the most important audience segments are millennials or Generation Y. They actually make up a very, very big and important segment of the consumer audience. And 78% of these actually asked in a survey say they need and they're inclined to become part of a brand if they are face-to-face, if they have face-to-face interaction. So participants in the event actually start talking about interaction with a brand very quickly after that interaction. And up to 90% will actually talk to their friends and family within 2 days. So moving on. One of the issues about experiential marketing is the actual data that you get out of it and the figures. A lot of marketers are afraid to try this out because they don't think they can give big enough numbers to their boss. And in this case, it's actually about quality over quantity. So we're talking about engagement, which actually resonates much more with the consumer and is much more valuable for the brand as opposed to just being exposed. So in traditional marketing, we have the average rule of 7, which means you need about 7 exposures to convert a consumer into a buyer. In our case, we actually can achieve this in just 1 interaction. So, as Albert said, Not everything that can be counted counts. Not everything that counts can be counted. What we're looking at is quality over quantity. So how do we measure an experience? We can actually measure how many people go to an event, how many people interact with us, but how can we measure how good the experience was? We actually can work in market research methods into the experience using brand ambassadors and promoters, and we can actually have a 2-for-1, which means we can gather data about a brand and at the same time create consumer connections. So I'll move on to the more interesting stuff now. How do we go about creating experience? Well, we have started the idea. What we want to do is create something which instills a memory in consumers' minds. We want them to make them feel something, to have an emotional response to what we do. The story is the core, fundamental building block of every experience. The brand narrative has to be very, very clear, and we don't want to brand, we don't want to sell, we want to actually be authentic. So everything we design has to have in mind the experience, and we have to focus on the user experience, not on putting logos and making this into just another exposure to our brand. This is a very nice example. Basically, everyone knows Angry Birds. I'm sure you've all played it. And what this experiential campaign did was actually bring out of the virtual and into the physical a game that everyone was used to. So here's a little video so you can see people's reactions. Can we have some sound? Can you turn up the sound, please? So this is a very good example of turning the tables on, on realities. You take something which exists in a virtual world and you bring it into the real world, and people react to it very differently than you expect. Here's a campaign we did in Greece for Cosmote. What they wanted to do is actually create a very simple experience because it needed to appeal to a great number of age groups, from very young people to very old people. So this was an interactive Christmas tree, which we had a construction made with lights and bicycle trees. But what we used, the technology we used was an Arduino. So we put sensors on bicycles, and we invited people to cycle for us, and we basically gathered money for charity that Cosmote was sponsoring. So here's a video of this. The Arduino displayed all the kilometers on a big screen, and we invited people to participate in this very simple mechanism. So a lot of the times, simple is much better than complicated. It means you can get a much wider range of audiences, people that aren't familiar with technology, to interact with your brand. This campaign was very successful. We had over 10,000 participants over the period of 2 weeks, and we gathered an equal amount of money in euros for the charity. Engagement is very, very important. We need to create experiences and allow the consumers to take control of those experiences. What is the most powerful thing is to make the consumer, put them at the center of the experience. So this is a very good example of when you consumers being immersed in the experience. Again, something very simple, but very entertaining for both the consumer and the people that are at the venue. So I'm sure this person will remember this for quite a long time to come. And he'll obviously tell all his friends about it, and the people watching him would probably tell all their friends. He's probably got friends taking pictures and posting them online. So this is a very good example of how you can utilize an experience in order to promote your brand. We need to constantly surprise our audiences, especially millennials, which are an audience segment that have seen it all, done it all. They're very opinionated. What we did here for Vodafone is they did a global relaunch of all their stores, the rebranding of all their stores. They started with the one in Athens, the main flagship store in Athens. So in this case, we actually put a hidden Easter egg in one of the product displays. So you'd walk up to it, and it looked like just any other product display, a Samsung tablet, and a digital signage sign behind it. So when you walked up to it in order to check out the product, and you tapped on the screen of the tablet, you got a prompt to press a button. When you did that, suddenly the whole product display station was turned into a gaming station. What we're promoting here is Vodafone's loyalty scheme. And we converted basically all of the companies that participated in the loyalty scheme, put them in a virtual city. The player could drive around the city. He could gather points, which then were redeemable, actually at the businesses. And obviously, he could take part in a prize draw, which happened every month. Another important rule is always allow consumers to be part of the story. It's all about them. It's not about our brand. We just facilitate them to have an experience. This is another case that we did for Wind in Greece. It's actually pretty old, but I think it's a nice case to show you. Wind was just launching their new LTE network. And we needed a mechanism to involve consumers, create consumer content to advertise this, but also utilize their new LTE network in order to demonstrate the new speeds. So we set up a bullet time array with using 40 Samsung Galaxy S3 phones, which were then just out. Here's a video of how this went, how it worked, and it actually was won Grand Hermes Prize, which is the advertising award prizes in Greece. Just ignore the numbers, these are from the first 2 days. Basically, you could review your video instantaneously. It was uploaded to YouTube within a minute over the LTE network. You got an email with a link, again at the same time, within a minute. So everything was virtually instantaneous. And we did all this in order to promote sharing of the content and get as many people through the installation as possible, therefore creating as much content as possible for Wind's YouTube channel. Culture. Culture is a very, very good platform for creating interactive experiences. A lot of brands sponsor culture, and when you get a lot of people together, you can do some very interesting things. A new technology that's coming out are these crowdsourced displays, they're called, but they're at a very, very early stage at the moment. Basically, every member of the audience is wearing an LED bracelet. These bracelets are controlled by a central radio-controlled application, and you can basically control them as if they were a pixel. So each member of the audience becomes a pixel in a screen, and when you have a whole stadium full of these people, you can create some pretty cool effects. And obviously the audience themselves, they feel more involved in the whole experience because they're immersed within, they're part of the content that's being displayed. We need to always understand our audience and the experience we want to design for them. As I mentioned earlier, for the Cosmote tree, we tried to do something which was very simple in order to appeal to the maximum amount of people possible. In other circumstances, you might want to focus exactly on the lifestyle or the trends that the audience segment that you're building for actually follow. Choose the right tools. It's always easy to, get involved with the hype and say, okay, I'm going to use the latest gadgets, the Oculus, for instance, which is a very cool gadget, but it's a bit early yet to start deploying, commercial campaigns with it. The potential's there, but you need to really pick very carefully what tools you're going to use, because things can go wrong very quickly, and you need to be prepared. This is an example of a campaign which basically transforms a physical object and gives it a personality. I think this is something we always need to keep in mind, is the physical aspect, because we are actually designing experiences in the physical world with digital tools. So bridging the two is the most important thing. Check out this case here. This is Toyota in Australia, and the venue is actually an art festival, so people are predisposed to actually interacting. They're not in a hurry, and they have some time on their hands.
Well, just then it made me feel sad when it was sad.
It felt a bit strange to be tickling a car, but it made me laugh.
Just thought it was lights in the car at first, but yeah, it's so much more interactive.
It's a really cool thing for Toyota to do this. There's nothing else like it.
And it's also very pretty, so it attracts people from afar. So, if possible, we want to immerse our audience as much as possible into the experience. Forget about where they are for a moment in the physical world, and just let them get lost in our world, in our experience that we created. This is a very good example by Nike on how to engage football audiences, and they created this very, very high-tech interactive game, which I think is very, very appropriate for the audience segment that it's been designed for.
And 2 ball feeders threw a ball for the player to
So they have visual tracking of the ball.
Players were challenged to hit moving targets and dodge virtual defenders.
There's targets on the walls being projection mapped.
The light beams basically deducted the life of the player, expressed in the form of agility points.
So the player has to avoid the light beams, which are the defenders of the opposite team.
Now the light head would chase the ball and detect the impact. The players would actually aim for a target that would appear randomly during gameplay. So we developed a tracking system that would detect the point of impact.
So if you're a 15-year-old kid and, Messi's your hero, you, I think, enjoy this kind of experience. Well, social obviously is nowadays in our lives constantly. So for any experience that you want to design, you always want to keep social in the mix before, during, and after the event. Especially during the event, because you want the users to generate as much content as possible and get the word out there on social media, promoting your brand for you. An experience can be very different on paper than it is in real life. I mean, as I mentioned before, with the tools, it's very important to know your stuff and choose the right tools, but at the same time, it's also very important to, at a conceptual level, be able to think ahead and try and predict a little bit of the things that could go wrong. So this is a famous example, which is LG's G2 phone's launch, which went a bit wrong in South Korea. They actually, for the launch, hung the phones off balloons, released them into the atmosphere, and they asked participants to shoot down the balloons. So here's a news report of what actually happened. They had about 20 injuries, and obviously when you're shooting at objects and a crowd running, in a field trying to gather phones, you're going to end up with some injuries, and this was a PR disaster for LG. One of the main things of our work is because we deal with so many avant-garde technologies, we need to be brave. We need to not be afraid to experiment, and we need to be able to explain to clients that they shouldn't be afraid to experiment. The only way to learn in this field is to experiment. It's okay to make certain mistakes. If you learn from your mistakes and you recover quickly, that's the only way you can actually evolve. And the only way you can actually be ahead of your competition and ahead of the curve is to have made those mistakes early on, before they do, and have learned before they have. So, we're coming to the technical part. We have some of the tech here. You can come down at the end of the session. You can try some of the stuff out. I just thought I'd go through them quickly with you and show you some more videos. The Kinect. Kinect's been out for a while now. It's run by Microsoft. It's produced by Microsoft. But the nice thing is they've released it into the open, and anyone can develop for the platform. This is the Leap Motion. The Leap Motion is, again, another motion controller. It's for fingers and hands. It's for close proximity. But in this case, you can actually see an application which I think is very interesting, allowing normal people to conduct their own orchestra. And I think the visual element of this installation is very, very interesting. So you actually are living the music. It's quite interesting. Here's the Oculus. You must have heard a lot about the Oculus, recently bought by Facebook. They're doing actually something really clever. They're taking their time in releasing the consumer version. At the moment, there's only the developer kit available, and there's a bit of a delay in deliveries for people which have ordered lately. So we're quite lucky to have some here to show you. Here's some videos of reactions of people which have worn it the first time. And I'd like to see some of your reactions when you come down after the session.
Oh my fucking god! What the fuck? Oh my fucking god!
God damn it!
We actually have a roller coaster demo here for you, so you can try it for yourself. Unity. Unity is a platform, a gaming engine basically, and it allows us to create content for all of these platforms, including Oculus. Basically, it's nothing new as far as the technology is concerned. What it helps us do is create stuff quickly, cheaply, and it has a huge community behind it and great asset store, so you can actually throw games together very quickly. The Vodafone game I showed you earlier, we actually produced in about 2 weeks, which was a very quick turnaround time for us. And a lot of the times in reality, clients don't think ahead of time, so you really need to be quick and respond quickly to the demands. Here's some of the stuff you can do in Unity. Basically, you can create games, 3D worlds, you can control everything in the world, you can write scripts which communicate with other platforms. You can see the Oculus being used. So you see it can be combined with Kinect, sleep motion sensors. You can publish for nearly any platform. You can make the same game and publish it for PlayStation, for mobile, for web. And you can actually load in scans, point cloud scans, say you do from Kinect, etc. So you can combine all these platforms and you can load all the data into Unity and create amazing things with it. Now, Arduino's been around for a long time, a couple of years now. And we used it, as I mentioned earlier, in the Cosmote, the interactive bicycle tree. But this is a very nice example. I'm sure you're all very familiar with Pixar's animated logo and Pinocchio, the little lamp that jumps around. Well, these guys here, they used the Arduino and they brought a actual real lamp come to life. So they hooked up the Arduino to some servos. There's a webcam where the light bulb is with some facial recognition software, similar to what the guys here from Future Candy have brought us. No motion recognition, but facial recognition. So the Arduino is basically a printed circuit board, a microcontroller board, where we can connect sensors to, and then we can input the data very easily into any PC via USB. Doesn't that make an inanimate object look lifelike? Well, this is another piece of tech we're waiting, very anticipating for its arrival. Unfortunately, it's been delayed. Again, like all of these crowd-funded startups, they face problems sometimes, but this is a wearable gesture control device which is going to have a lot of applications, and we're quite excited to get our hands on it and start playing around with it. So it actually can detect rotational movement and electrical impulses that are produced in your muscles. And last but not least, there's a lot of 3D scanning stuff coming out, and I'm not going to talk about 3D printing because it doesn't really have to do with consumer experiences, but we are basically mapping our world in 3 dimensions. And there's a lot of gadgets out there coming in that you can hook onto iPads or iPhones, but this is Project Tango, which is basically Google's project, and they've released the phone to a limited number of developers, a bit like Google Glass. And here's a preview of what it's about.
We are physical beings that live in a 3D world. Yet mobile devices today assume that the physical world ends at the boundaries of the screen. Our goal is to give mobile devices a human-scale understanding of space and motion.
This is going to allow people to interact with their environment in just a fundamentally different way. We can prototype in a couple hours something that would take us months or even years before, because we didn't have this technology readily available.
What happens if you have all of these pieces in a phone? How does that change what a phone is?
We have created a prototype phone containing highly customized hardware and software designed to allow the phone to track its motion in full 3D in real time as you hold it. These sensors make over 250,000 3D measurements every single second, updating the position and rotation of the phone, fusing this information into a single 3D model of the environment.
I think that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed our presentation.